Hello everyone out there in podcast land. Welcome back to Adventure Capital, where we not only discuss the entrepreneurial journeys and adventures with founders who have raised capital on Wefunder, but also the different resource providers and mentors helping founders along the way. Huzzah! Today is quite the treat seeing how we have the bird and code whisperer himself joining us. Greg Belote, our co-founder, offering a much needed and wanted perspective to the founder journey and all things Wefunder. The arm hairs are rising already. Wefunder gang, take it away.
So Greg, Wefunder's co-founder and CTO, welcome to the Adventure Capital podcast.
Thank you, Jonny. I'm so excited to be here.
We are very excited too. We spend these episodes usually interviewing founders that have raised money on Wefunder. I guess you are also a founder who has raised money on Wefunder.
Technically correct.
Really,
the best kind.
I think you're the first team member that we've interviewed for this podcast, and we're really stoked to pick your brain on the journey of Wefunder down the years and what it's like to be on the engineering team at Wefunder. But let's start by going right back to the beginning, actually, even before Wefunder. What was young Greg doing before you founded Wefunder?
Young Greg. Well, it depends on how far back you want to go, but I started dipping my toes in the world of startups back in 2010. I founded my first company. I left my nice full-time gig at TripAdvisor to found a startup that doesn't exist anymore for good reason with one of my close friends from college. And that's actually where I met Nick, my co-founder of Wefunder. So we started this company called Tutorial Tab and got into Techstars Boston and shared an office room with Nick and learned a lot of hard lessons about actually building valuable businesses. Ran that for about 9 months, started another company that didn't do well either. And Wefunder was the third time the charm startup for me.
So just to dig in while we're there, what were one or two of those hard lessons that you learned about starting companies?
Yeah. So I was the stereotypical tech guy who was building something fun, and the business was the afterthought. So I figured this cool piece of tech, surely I can find some way to sell it to someone, and was very abstract with the way that I thought about the product. So what we were doing was we built this JavaScript plugin that you could drop into your website, and you could set it up to create these interactive like tooltips that would, kind of follow a user from page to page. And the point was to, train your new users so that, you spend so much money trying to acquire users, you got to really turn them into power users for your product. And, for me, I thought that meant that they understood the how to use the website part of the problem. And so, you can kind of see things like that now where like a new feature will be launched on YouTube, and then there'll be a little tooltip that is like, hey, step 1 of 4, check out this new thing. And usually you're just trying to find the X to stop it. But we were trying to make this into a subscription business, and it didn't work well, right? Like you could program this thing and it had some limits. Like you, if you're trying to create a tutorial for like E-Trade, you could show someone how to place a limit order, but you couldn't really explain to them what a limit order was. And so what wound up happening was that, if you made a spectrum of products where on one end you have these really complicated products where the problem is not where is the button and how do you fill out a form? It's like what you're trying to do is complicated. And on the other end, there's the startup where the user can't find the button, at which point you're just better off fixing your user interface as opposed to slapping on this tutorial. So we had a very narrow, band of companies. And one of the biggest embarrassing mistakes that I made, like this was like my idea. I came up with it. I was very attached to it. And this was, I don't know if you remember, but back in 2010, like customer development was a big thing. This was around the time that the Lean Startup came out, and everyone was talking about how you need to talk to your customers to learn what they want, so you can build things that they want and will pay for. Common sense stuff. And so we met with dozens of founders and companies. And, you know, we would show them our demo and they'd be like, oh, that's really cool. And, you know, we would come out of it where, you know, they weren't really that interested. Like, well, one, they said it was cool. So obviously we took that as a compliment that we were building something really cool. And two, you know, they weren't bullish on like using our product. And so our conclusion wasn't, you know, well, clearly we're not building something that's really important for people. It was, we must not be explaining our vision correctly. We must be doing customer development wrong. And so we were just plowing ahead with our idea of what this vision would be. And there was lots of, you know, well, if we could increase conversion rates by 1% and multiply that by the amount of revenue someone makes, we're adding millions of dollars of value to a company. But at the end of the day, we like, one, we didn't get anyone to pay us money, but two, we went through the exercise of creating tutorials for companies for free. We'd basically be like, here is a piece of JavaScript. You put it in your website and it will create these tutorials for people so that they will learn how to use your product. And no one put that in their website. It was really bad. Yeah.
Wow.
So lots of stubborn clinging to my precious, you know, first idea that I had that seemed like it could be a real company.
Which basically seems to be the idea of Clippy. So
yeah, exactly.
Long and short, you created Clippy.
I'm sure it was a better version of Clippy. Come on, this is Greg Belote we're talking about.
The technology was really cool and exciting to build. But no one misses Clippy.
So when did Wefunder come into existence during this journey?
Yeah, it started with Nick and one of our mutual friends, Nick. And they had caught wind that Congress was considering passing legislation that would allow anyone to invest in startups. This was around the time that Kickstarter had, you know, kind of entered the mainstream, where people had heard about these high profile, you know, campaigns where someone raised, you know, millions of dollars to build, you know, products, you know, basically doing pre-sales. And it was also still in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis aftermath, right? So, you know, throughout Techstars, you know, we would talk about how cool it would be if we could all own a piece of each other's business. And that way, if one of us is successful, we at least get to share in that success. But given the rules and regulations, that wasn't really a feasible thing to do. So Nick, having, you know, caught on that this is something that was being considered, he got really excited and he got involved with trying to promote this legislation. And so Wefunder actually started out as kind of an online petition. Like it's in the code. Like there's just like it was a petition website with maybe a mock-up or two of what a profile would look like. And
wait, is that where the signatures at the bottom of the charter come from?
It was reused. Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, he did something pretty clever where, you know, it was a petition that you sign and then you share on Facebook with your friends, but you would also, there'd be this drop down where it would say you're basically signing like, I want the right to invest in, and there'd be a drop down. It would default at like $2,000. I'd like to invest $2,000 in startups and small businesses, and then you'd sign it and then share on Facebook. And so what happened was he went out and got all of his friends to sign this petition and share it. And because it had this number attached to it, when you added up that number, it started to become an impressive figure. So you launch this petition, and then you get $1 million or $5 million. I forget what the figure was, but he was able to leverage that in order to get local press in Boston, because that's where we were at the time. And through that local PR, he caught the attention of the Massachusetts senator, who was actually one of the co-authors of the versions that got rolled into the Jobs Act. And so he got invited down to Washington to be, kind of a startup expert to give advice to the various legislators on the bill. And so he was able to make some connections with staffers and some members of Congress. And, long story short, it did eventually pass into law back in 2012. And I joined the company shortly after that. I had been winding down my startup and dipped my toes in the consulting world and was looking for something more fulfilling in my life. So I was a pretty close friend with Nick. We would, stay together late in the co-working space and order fried chicken wings for dinner every night. And he needed a technical co-founder, and I was pretty excited about this whole crowdfunding thing, and things worked out.
Was it love at first co-founder site? Like, I guess you were kind of working on different startups when you met Nick. So did you just kind of get to know each other and you got to kind of think, oh, wow, like this guy's really smart. We would complement each other well. And then when the opportunity presented itself, how did the relationship come to be, I guess? And of course, Mike was involved as well at this point.
Yeah, totally. No, it was at first sight is we had been friends for about 2 years, but early on, like the company he was working on, I really thought that he was doing something exciting and had a lot of respect for his ability to make products, and thought he was just like a pretty smart dude. And we actually did work together a little bit beforehand. We did these consulting gigs. And so it was, we kind of knew each other professionally and then became friends, which in my experience works out better than the other way. It's hard to have like close friends, and then it's harder to find that like perfect mesh of skills. But Nick and I complement each other really well. And the same is true with Mike, who we met through the co-working space that we were a part of. And so I like to joke that Nick was the eyes, Mike was the lips, and I was the fingers, where Mike was really good at building relationships and biz dev and a lot of things that you do now at Wefunder, Jonny. And Nick is really good about thinking holistically, thinking about the user and like what kind of products do we need to have, and it's also really good at breaking stagnation. So a lot of good traits there, and I am really good at building things, and because we have that mutual respect, it makes it a lot easier to work together. And that like kind of Nick has his domains, I have my domains, and there's not a lot of toe stepping that happens. So it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, it's awesome to see how much respect you guys have for each other. I feel like you then really kind of can, I don't know, I was going to say delegate, but that's not the right word, but just trust each other in the various areas of the business that you lead.
Yeah, totally.
It's a beautiful friendship. It's lovely to witness.
Yeah. And it's kind of wild that we've known each other for 11 years now. Time flies.
You and Nick have known each other, I guess, as long as my wife and I have been married. So lots of parallels. I was just going to say, when you met each other, you were dating other people, i.e. working on different startups, and then it came back around. And, yeah.
Love that. Greg, how far into Wefunders life did you guys get into YC, and what were like your top takeaways from that experience?
Yeah, pretty soon. I mean, maybe I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 months after I joined, we started the process of like putting together a YC app, and we applied and were lucky enough to get in. It was a really powerful, informative experience for us. I mean, probably the biggest thing that we got out of it was just developing a much better intuition for what it takes to get high quality startups to use this crowdfunding thing. Like, we were super naive when we started the company, right? Like, we believe that every company needs money, and therefore every company would want to use a product that helps them raise money easier. But that's not really how it works. Like, you have this things kind of get upside down at a point where, instead of founders chasing investors, you have investors chasing founders, right? There's like this feeling of scarcity, that there is only a couple high quality deals, and that's a super subjective thing. But basically, going through YC, there are a few companies that tend to be seen as very successful and one that everyone wants to invest in. And for those, you really have to fight as an investor to get in. And so when you start introducing new regulatory things that haven't been tested, or just any amount of friction and work, it becomes a very tough sell to get that company to use your product. I mean, like, when you're comparing, like, hey, I have a bunch of investors trying to write me $100,000 checks, and I have to pick which ones I don't accept. They're not too keen on launching a multi-month crowdfunding campaign to try to raise $1 million. So it was really interesting. I mean, we had a lot of ideas, and thought that we had fixed all the problems back in 2012, and try to get companies to raise using what's called like blue sky law. Like, each state essentially has their own rules and regulations for accepting non-accredited investors, like friends and family type folks. And if you pick the right states and you follow all the constraints, you can raise from about 35 people. And so that was what we did to kind of dog food our platform. Is in the fall of 2012, we raised money on Wefunder for Wefunder, which was great. And we timed that with our YC application, so we can come in saying, hey, we just raised $500,000 with our own product. But we had a hell of a time trying to get other companies to jump through all those hoops. Like, we had a reason to like want to do it and take on any kind of risk and pain that entailed, but other companies generally don't want to do that. So that was probably the biggest takeaway. I mean, the network of alumni is pretty strong, and we've benefited a lot just having that label. It's like getting into Harvard or MIT. It's like you put that on your resume, and it opens doors. Like, we can, we can reach out to most people in YC and be like, hey, we're also YC, and they'll read our emails, right? That like learning of what it took to get some of the most sought after companies to want to use like what it takes to sell those companies was really valuable. And you can kind of see like fingerprints of that traced throughout the years. Even today, like, a lot of our product design and thinking kind of originates in what would make this a no-brainer for a top tier YC company, because a lot of that can, if it's something that is compelling for a company that has too many fundraising options to consider, it's generally going to translate well to companies that aren't in that fortunate or privileged of position. So
I was going to ask a different question, but actually, just while we're on this subject, we were talking about this the other day. How do you design, because we're trying to win, the hottest company coming out of YC and saying you have investors lining up to invest in you, but we want you to reserve some allocation of your round for your fans and your customers and your earliest believers on Wefunder. but we also want to design for, I don't know, the coffee shop, or the Main Street brewery that, doesn't have all those options, or, another tech startup that's doing a friends and family round versus like a super hot, seed round. So when you're designing products, how do you try to strike that balance between, just designing for the perfect use case, the perfect user, but also accommodating everyone?
That's a great question. I mean, that's like classic hard branding, challenge is if you're going to fragment your brand to mean all these different things, it means nothing. And, it's also tough for us because what we do is so complicated. There's so many things that we do that there's just no way that you can really sum it all up in, your kind of initial pitch or conversation. So, I mean, you just kind of pick the parts that you think are important to those different audiences and focus on that. So, for a local restaurant, maybe you focus more on getting the being able to like raise locally and get the local community involved, and to be able to use kind of the people who are coming in your door as like a way to reach new investors and sell them on that. Like that might be a more successful pitch compared to like, cap table, which you might not care as much about if you're opening up a new branch of your local brewery. But yeah, I mean, when you go to, a startup, like it depends. Like, there are different ways you can take it. And I don't really know what the right answer is, right? Like we haven't quite figured that out yet, but certainly there is a lot of power in having a lot of luxe surface area. Like if you have a product that, it's kind of the same pitch in a different form, right? It's like you get all of your customers involved and they love what you're doing, and they're going to help evangelize and tell their friends about it. That can be helpful. One thing that we've been talking about for so long and haven't really figured out how to do is that, how do you actually tap into, you have 1,000 investors, let's say, like, how do you like really leverage that network? Like, it's hard to know who those people are, but, odds are, like, let's say you're trying to talk to someone, in shipping, like you want to talk to someone at Flexport, and like odds are if you have, thousands of investors that like maybe one of them knows or like works at Flexport or knows someone in there, like, can you, essentially join all the LinkedIn networks to figure out who knows who? And can you find other ways that the crowd can help you do like well-packaged tasks? It's like tricky, right? Like, like simple example is like, hey, we're going to launch a product. You tell all of your investors, hey, on this day, we're going to, do a big launch, tweet it out to your friends, like that kind of makes sense. Are there ways to ask for help in ways that someone who, has been following your business can kind of jump in and help in a way that's not going to be overwhelming? It's tricky. I didn't really answer your question, but there are a lot of pieces, and
I'm struggling with the answer to that question right now. I think probably as a company, we seem to be kind of coming down on the side of like being quite focused in how we're designing the product and communicating on the founders that we most want on the platform. But that also we can accommodate everyone, but we're kind of designing for that one kind of perfect use case. But I just don't know if that's like the right approach. And obviously, as you say, over time, hopefully we can kind of be more nuanced. We're working on a landing page right now for brewery founders, and we're going to be serving up ads to brewery founders and sending them to a targeted landing page. And hopefully over time we can be more kind of nuanced and differentiated in how we build the product, both for founders and investors. But going back to the conversation we were having earlier, I when I left Kiva after 7 years running the US team, I I looked back on what I knew at the start of that journey in 2011 and the kind of questions we were asking and kind of how we were building stuff. And it was really cool to see how much I had learned over those 7 years and how dumb I was when I started that journey. You were just talking then about, you learned that it was kind of hard to persuade YC founders to raise on Wefunder, but either on the business and strategy side or on the product and engineering side, what are the other things that you look back on, like 2012 Greg or 2012 Wefunder, and you're like, wow, we really didn't know anything. And it's so cool that we learned these like really important lessons over the last decade.
Yeah, it's let's think. I mean, one of the things that we didn't like, I think we did it right earlier on. Maybe not 2012, but kind of doing whatever it takes for these like flagship customers to use your platform.
Mm-hmm.
That includes like bending and breaking your product by hacking stuff in to accommodate what they want.
What, Greg? We've never done that, have we?
Yeah. But I mean, just imagine, trying to, there's, so as an engineer, you kind of have, like one way to think of things is you have all these constraints, and they can either be loose constraints or tight constraints, where you can come in and say like, okay, well, you can only raise if you are a C Corp using the safe note,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to use our contracts. Like that is a choice that you could take. But you're going to lose companies that are like, well, our own lawyers put together this safe contract that we want to use, or we want to do a convertible note or share price or things like that. And there's it's a very easy excuse to make for yourself if you don't want to do that extra work, to say like, well, that's not scalable or maintainable to do all these short-term things. But it isn't like guaranteed that you're going to get to the point where that matters. Like, it's much more important to find to get these companies, like for us, get the customers on using our product, and we're going to learn a lot through them anyways. So don't stay too fixed on what you think the product should be in the beginning, because you're going to learn. And like one really great thing about Nick is that he is good at just like really pushing and trying things, even if it's like really messy and chaotic internally. Because you just got to learn by getting it in front of people. Like that was one of the problems we had in our initial attempt at doing crowdfunding back in 2012, is that we like talked to a lawyer about how to let's see, I think we talked to like some third tier VCs and a lawyer about the problem with crowded cap tables, and thought, okay, well, we're just going to draft a document that solves all of those concerns and we're done. But it wasn't until we actually tried to get companies using this that we learned that there are problems to it. Like one example that kind of surprised me was we had this like proxy agreement where if you were making an investment in this convertible note, you would proxy your voting rights to the CEO, and that would just take care of any kind of problems that you would have. But that neglected the reality of like if your company is being acquired by a firm that really cross its T's and dot its I's, like it's going to want to make sure that every investor signs off on the acquisition, even though technically they might be able to proxy the right. Like it's an uncertain thing. They could sue the parent company and it could tank the deal. And it's just like that lack of like understanding that nuance, or even knowing that it could be a problem, didn't happen until we actually got in it and tried pushing our way of doing things and getting kind of that feedback of like, no, this is not something that we're going to do. So you've got to like, the purpose is to learn as quickly as you can, and just like accept the fact that your hands are going to be dirty and things are going to be messy and chaotic and out of control. And like we made several mistakes over the years where we tried to become a platform too quickly, where we would say, oh, we'll just find these these people who are going to bring in all the deals to our platform. So we just need to make this platform for these like angel investors who are going to, you know, bring in more companies, and we don't have to, you know, really worry about that. But it was like abstracting things a little too much. We were trying to jump a step in our growth, and there are just several things that we've done where you know, it would have just been better if we just kept it simple. You know, instead of trying to build something for other people to do the thing, first we should do it ourselves, build the tools to do that well, and then bring people in. And one thing that we've been really fortunate about is just getting lucky with like the people that we've hired, and been able to like maintain like a high culture bar to the point where like everyone really likes the people at the company. And when anyone interviews with us, that's like a pretty strong takeaway consistently. And that's a hard thing to do. I credit a lot of that to Nick and Suze and you. And but it is like such an asset to us, and wouldn't have been something that we'd have if we hadn't cared so much about culture earlier on.
Totally. Yeah, Wefunder is such an interesting place where like not only is the company building things for the first time, but also we operate within an industry that is being set up for the first time. And there are just so many gray areas to navigate. You know, add rapid growth onto that. It's truly the perfect storm.
Yeah. Also, just to add on to my answer, sorry to cut you off. Yeah, no. Another thing is like, it's surprising how far you can go by using this like Wizard of Oz technique when building products, where instead of actually having a backend that does things automatically, it's just like a form and some human does something in the background.
Are you the wizard, Greg? I am the wizard. Yeah. In this analogy, Greg is the wizard. We've got it on tape. On the record, Greg is the wizard. Now we know.
Yeah.
My favorite saying at Wefunder is an act of Greg instead of comes by an act of Greg.
Yeah, I was pretty amused when I started seeing the memes for that.
Our highly specific internal memes.
Yeah. That's when you know you've made it.
Definitely. You talked about some of the product kind of mazes that have resulted from trying to please customers and get cool companies to raise with us. What are some of the things on the engineering product side that you're actually really proud of over the years?
Yeah, I mean, probably the biggest thing is just like, I've built something that has moved like $250 million around. That is terrifying, and also something that I have a lot of pride in. You know, and so yeah, I mean, what we do isn't simple, and we've been lucky enough that most of the things that we built over the last 9 years, we've been able to build on top of and improve. And there's a lot of things that we do. So we, you know, Nick and I sometimes joke that we built several startups inside of Wefunder. And, you know, we're pretty vertically integrated, as you two know. Like we have our own contract signing software, our own compliance tools, and all these other things that could be just the sole focus of a business. But it has given us a lot of strategic flexibility, because we it's ours, we own it, we can change it the way that we need it. And you know, I can see it being just the foundations of you know, when we have dedicated teams building these things, we can make them, you know, really powerful, and you know, we'll be around for a pretty long time, I think.
Yeah, how did we decide? That's a pretty big kind of strategic decision, I guess, right? Like, do you build the ability to administer SPVs ourselves, or do you outsource that to Assure? You know, do you build like kind of K1 like infrastructure yourself, or do you kind of partner with people, or do you buy? So is that just like, it kind of happens just like organically, because you're then also mentioning, and we have a team of great people who like building stuff? Or is it like a deliberate strategy that, 5 years ago, you and Nick kind of thought it through and said, okay, at some point, us having the 2% cost saving on Ashore is going to be a significant strategic advantage. And so let's kind of really move in this, kind of build versus buy direction.
It definitely wasn't the latter one. I mean, for a lot of these things, like they didn't exist when we started. So like with the contract system, there was no hello sign. Like that like would have been a great API for us to use, but there's basically DocuSign, which we used as like our contract signing system for the Wefunder, like first Wefunder round, and it sucked. Like we didn't like it. And there was really nothing else that existed that was better, and we could build it, and we did. Similar with the kind of spinning up these SPVs. When we started doing SPVs, they were like very much not like a common thing. Like raising money online was like pretty new. Like some people had tried it, maybe 5 or 10 years earlier, and it like failed into obscurity. But it was like, I remember back in 2012, like all these, self-confident VCs are like, no one would ever raise money online as a legitimate business. And, there weren't these like adjacent industries where there would be like a company that could spin up, SPVs or do K1s. I mean, we tried doing K1s with TurboTax back in 2015 for the funds that we raised in 2014. And like I remember our ops guy, Dylan at the time was like, talking to the sales dude at TurboTax. It was like, oh yeah, sure, totally. We can, handle, several hundred partners in your LLC and blah, blah, blah. And then, we went through the process and entered a bunch of data. And then he was like, oh yeah, by the way, it's going to cost like, like $20,000 to do this filing, which like we didn't really, want to or could comfortably afford. So we just like, it's like that, build it ourselves. And, we kind of found ourselves with, these things that we built that, we could just invest more in and improve. I mean, there's some, it's interesting. Like if you were to rewind the clock and say that we had the choice of paying some service provider to do these things for us, that are like, there would be a pretty strong argument saying that we should outsource that, focus on the thing that we do well, focus more on getting founders, and we probably would have had a better growth over those years. I mean, it's lucky that these things that we spent time in are like assets and can be like pretty important strategic assets. Like we're the only crowd like Reg CF platform that I'm aware of that has, our like the way that we do money management and escrow. Everyone else outsources to some third party company.
Right.
And so they're all, one, like that company has to make enough of a profit to justify its existence. And two,
Right.
Like if they want to do anything, that's
Custom.
pretty different, a custom, like they have to convince the company to let them do it. So,
and there's a strategic risk as well.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of the partners in the sector that other platforms use are, maybe on shaky ground financially. And so if that goes away, then you're scrambling to find an alternative. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, I mean, you were talking before about a highlight, something you're super proud of. You built a system that $250 million has been transacted through, and probably this time next year it'll be $500 million. But are there any big regrets that you have that you're willing to share publicly on a podcast? But if you kind of look back over the years, do you kind of, and I guess thinking of like CTOs of other startups that might be listening to this, what are some big mistakes that you've learned from, or if you could wind the clock back, you'd do it differently?
Certainly. I mean, Where to begin? I mean, not investing in junior talent is like a pretty clear mistake that I'd made. It wasn't until 2019 that we seriously started doing that, and it's been great. I mean, we found some really impactful, great people who we hired and then trained over the course of 6 months to a year, and who are like very important contributors. But I remember back in 2015, 2016, not wanting to hire a junior level engineer just because the kind of difficulty level of contributing to our code base, because it was messy and complicated, and I had a lot of reasons and didn't have time to train them and all those things. I really only wanted to hire like mid-level and senior level people, which, I did hire some, but it was really slow and hard, and probably would have been faster if I just hired a couple of interns and then spent, more time just training them and focusing on finding someone who's like a really great fit culturally and who can bring, more than just an ability to code to the company.
The gradient of the line at startups, I feel like the gradient of the line is probably more important than the y-intercept.
Yeah, and it's not like, I was thinking that Wefunder would like only be around for another year. It's like, yeah, this is like a 5, 10, 20-year endeavor. Like, sure, I can hire someone, and if I spend like 2 hours a week, mentoring them, and like, it's not like the only work that we have is hard work that only, the smartest of the smart people can do. No, that was ridiculous. We had plenty of things that needed love and attention that someone could work on. So that was like a pretty clear mistake, just in the contrast of being like a really understaffed team. Like, for a long time you would have like 2, 3 engineers, maybe 4 engineers, and trying to like really punch above our weight class in that. Our competitors would have like 20 engineers in their team. They'd have a company of like 80 people. Wefunder would be like 12 or 15 people. It's like it was not necessarily the most pleasant thing to do, because when you're really understaffed, it means that there's just a lot more work for everyone to do. It has forced us to be smarter. Like, we can't solve problems by just hiring a bunch of people. We have to solve them with technology, right? Which long term is generally better to have when you're hiring people, because then our account managers, today can do so much more because of the things that we built and laid in place over the last few years. So like, the hiring people definitely, like you're saying before, there are a lot of things that require an active Greg, like things that that aren't automated, that require someone with a lot of context, who knows like how things work, to go in and do something like very special. When it started out, it was like a really small, like infrequent thing. It's like, why spend a month building something that I can do in 20 minutes every other week? But as we've grown, and as we've gotten that product market fit, it's become really painful. And one of the things that I wish I had started sooner was kind of training and building better documents for folks. Like, right now, what I'm doing these days is like, when I'm doing one of these tasks that are kind of manual, that I shouldn't be doing as the CTO, but still am, like, I'll bring someone in, do some screen sharing, maybe do a screen recording, talk through what I'm doing, and slowly train people up so that it doesn't have to be just me. Since right now there are a few critical things that still have to be done through me or through engineering. But
I guess just to play devil's advocate there a little, going back to something you said earlier, you kind of just got to hack it today to give yourself the chance of making it through to tomorrow. So
yeah,
it's probably kind of like the textbook answer might be, as you were just saying, would have been better to build the automated scalable version rather than you just manually hacking it. But if you do that again and again, right, if you always take the month to build the scalable version rather than do the task yourself in 20 minutes, then maybe you never get to that point where you need the scalable version. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. It's like building a startup and working in engineering at a startup. You kind of have to hold these contradictions, right? Like you don't want to
exactly.
You want to build as quickly as you can, but you want to build something that like doesn't break down. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so kind of the there's definitely that spectrum, right? You don't want to be on either end. But a mistake that I made that caused me to delay a lot of these things is not really it kind of breaks down to like long-term versus short-term, where when there are problems and there are people like actively experiencing those problems, it's really easy to focus and be responsive to that, which is something that you should do. Like as a business, like these are your customers, like someone's raising, they've raised $1 million on your platform, they're having a problem, like you got to fix the problem. But that frame of mind of, it's not like weighing your time against, it's not like weighing one customer against 10 customers that you have like problems right now. It's about, the people you have today and the next 1,000 people. Like, how are you balancing the short-term needs of, dealing with fires for the customers you have today versus the future fires that you're going to have if you don't fix these problems?
So it's kind of interesting. Like, I'll give 2 examples in my own role on the BD side that actually map so interestingly to that. So the first is like, building the scalable solution for tomorrow just versus executing today. So we don't really systematically use a CRM, right, at Wefunder right now. And I speak to people who like work in BD teams and it's like, wait, what? Like, that sounds so insane. But like, I think we're about 2x what our leading competitors are in terms of investment volume with a BD team that's like probably half the size, despite not using a system, because we've just been focused on like executing and hustle, and that kind of scalable system might kind of slow us down to build and implement and kind of use. And so it's a really good, and now I think, okay, we hired Catherine, she's building out these processes, and now we'll build out the CRM. But it's like actually just being tenacious and just hustling over the last 3 years that I've been here has, I would argue, been actually the right focus. And then another example on what you were saying about like, fighting fires today versus, building for the future. Like, I just pulled a email bankruptcy move, which I actually got from you one time, I think about a year ago. Greg put a GIF around on Slack that was like that moment when Michael Scott just shouts out in the middle of the office, "I declare bankruptcy." It's like moved like a bunch of emails to a bankruptcy folder. And I did that the other day. So post March 15th, I just got like 2,000 emails behind and I just like was drowning. So I moved them all. And so I just like did not like do emails for a month. And in that month, we hired 3 new people who are now all onboarded and firing on all cylinders. And, we moved the needle forward on like tracking. We picked up KPIs and metrics again. And the amount of progress on infrastructure investment and building for the future in that month was phenomenal. But like, I totally dropped the ball on like the business as usual stuff. And to like a crazy extent, like I pushed it too far to the other extreme. But yeah, trying to find that balance between like obviously trying to fight fires and, keep customers happy today versus trying to invest for the future is just impossible challenge.
Yeah. And one of the things that's people usually don't consider when weighing that is like, sure, you could build a CRM, but like, you don't know if it's going to be the right CRM. Like we've tried CRMs at Wefunder and they weren't right. And we ended up just, abandoning them because it wasn't worth the maintenance. You learn so much by just doing it. And you have so many ideas of how to make it better, having done it yourself and feeling those pains. And you get to a point where it's like unarguable that we need it. And then that's like definitely the point where you want to build it.
Well, thanks for giving a justification for my incompetence, Greg. I appreciate that.
Yeah, with email, like if it's really important, they'll email you again, right? So maybe not with BD as much as engineering, but that's how I rationalize it to myself.
Mm-hmm.
If I declared bankruptcy with my email, I would have so many just furious founders. It would be the worst thing. Different role, but
I had a few
so
of those.
Yeah. Obviously, it's a super exciting time at Wefunder with all of the different March 15th changes that we've mentioned a couple of times. Startups can now raise 5 million through Reg CF. We have testing the waters, SPVs, all of these amazing milestones. Sort of in light of the conversation we just had around building super quickly, but balancing for the future, where do you see the future of Reg CF going overall? And what are kind of the biggest things on your radar from an engineering product standpoint?
Yeah. So we have several unarguable scaling problems right now with, the speed and reliability of like, moving money and just when you have, tens of thousands of investments, some of them are going to have edge cases and issues. And the more investments you have, the more of those pop up and things like that. So certainly more investing on improving the reliability. One big goal that I have, so right now, when a company raises money, we'll send them, like a disbursement of funds periodically, maybe once during the campaign, once right after they close, and then once a little after for any stragglers. But one point I would love to be at is to be able to send like very regular disbursements to companies. So almost like when you go to work for a company and you get signed up on payroll and you're going to get paid every other week, and you're going to get paid every other week, you just connect your bank account and it happens. I'd love for that to happen on Wefunder, where if you're a startup, you connect your bank account and then Wefunder will just close and disperse funds every other week. So you can have a constant stream of money coming in, as opposed to having to wait all the way to the end of your campaign or really have to think about the details of where different investors are in the process. That is like a pretty ambitious goal, but also super powerful one. That's one that I think would be difficult to emulate if you didn't own like a vertical stack. Like there's a lot of engineering and work that needs to be done on our end to make that happen. I mean, a lot of nice things happen along the way. Just like having an ambitious goal kind of forces you to make good decisions. It's a good compass for decision making. We're also growing the engineering team from about 8 people to, hopefully a little over 20, which itself is going to be a challenge. So just bringing more people in, training them, making sure that we kind of maintain our culture and our values, and how do we run a team that is 2 or 3 times bigger than the one that we currently have. Like that'll just have its own challenges. But
and I guess on that point, Greg, what when you say culture and values, what are we looking for in engineering recruits at Wefunder, both from a technical perspective, but also a culture and values perspective?
Yeah, it's really important to me that everyone who joins the team is really good at managing complexity and is able to exercise good judgment on the spectrum of, do I hack something together and get it out now and then learn from that, versus I need to build something super reliable and needs to be maintainable and readable. When dealing with money, like you don't want to be just, shooting it out and, you want to make sure that it works reliably. But when you're testing out new features and things that you don't even know if investors want to use, then being more aggressive at pushing something out when you know that it's okay for things to break. And that's like a hard that's a hard thing for someone to be good at, because it requires like holding that contradiction of, I want to build something well versus like, this is really messy and dirty, but I just need to get it done and be comfortable enough, to not like have to stop and clean it up. It's like, oof.
So
Like
that's
those are like
interesting.
that's
I presume, quite a hard thing to know if you're junior, right? That seems to me like that kind of judgment would seem to, like, when I was in management consulting, like as a new analyst, right? Like all the new analysts would always, like, they get an assignment from the partner, and then they'd go away and spend 3 days building this super complicated model, and then they would bring it back and it would be wrong. And also the partner was like, wait, I thought this was going to take you 30 minutes and it ended up taking you 3 days. I feel like that judgment thing is probably kind of harder to find in raw, like, or junior engineers. Is that fair, or is that just something you can rapidly coach someone on?
It's hard to coach someone on. I'm not sure how to really train someone. I don't have like a well packaged like set of steps to evaluate that, but our interview process involves a lot of like writing code and working on pair programming with someone for half a day, working on a feature, or working on kind of a more what word am I looking for? Just like working on some more pragmatic project, and like having interviewed and talked to a lot of people, like there's some pattern matching and subjectivity to, like, is this person so with like more junior developers, one thing that we do want to see is that they have a lot of drive to learn and are very quick at learning, because you're going to want them to make a lot of mistakes or do a lot of things that will result in a lot of mistakes, and then learn from those and adapt quickly. So certainly finding someone who can be comfortable jumping into a problem without fully understanding it, but also understanding it enough that they're not just going to jump in and flail. Having someone who does have some degree of self-awareness, of knowing what they know, knowing what they don't know, knowing when to ask for help versus try to figure out things themselves. You don't want someone to try to figure something out for 3 days that you could talk to them and explain in 15 minutes, but at the same time you don't want someone who is going to stop and ask every time they bump into something they don't know. And so we try to suss some of these things out. We also look at like the work that someone's done, so if they've built something complicated or interesting and can talk about it expertly, and you can kind of pick up on a lot of these things. And at the end of the day, like, you're not going to know 100%, but we try to aim for a process that is that optimizes against false positives, because there's a really high cost to hiring someone who's not a good fit for the team. So we will have false negatives in our interview process, where there'll be someone good, but they aren't clearly a yes hire. But it is it's a hard thing to do, and I don't really it's like one of those things where I don't have a playbook for it in a sense. Is you just have to kind of jump in, interview a bunch of people, and it's hard finding engineers in general. So maybe not the best sound bite for a podcast, but it has been my experience.
Working at Wefunder is it's very, very challenging in many, many dimensions, and hiring engineers is certainly one of them.
Yeah, one of the things that stood out to me from there, like when we joined YC, Paul Graham, who was still running it at the time, kind of gave this like intro speech, and one of the things he said is that you to work on a startup, it's like you got to be it's like jazz. You have to be able to like improvise and jump in and be comfortable just like thinking on your feet. and that is like absolutely true. And you have to be able to jump into a chaotic thing. You don't necessarily know all the things that you need to do. You have a vague sense of the direction you want to move in, and you just start moving, and then you course correct and you keep iterating.
I really like that analogy. Feels right.
It does. Well, Greg, we will leave you with a final question, because I'm sure Wefunder is falling apart without you while we've stolen you from the podcast. But yeah, I mean, you've obviously been through the journey of many startups, from kind of the very, very early stages, working on a few different startups, into a longer portion of the life cycle of Wefunder, especially now as we really start to hit product market fit. What would be your biggest piece of Greg life advice for a budding CTO of a startup?
Yeah, it's really important to know how to balance your burnout against your startup, like to be able to like turn off Slack notifications and turn off email, or not check email, and be able to sleep and enjoy a day or two off a week is like really important, because startups are very hard. You think that they will get easier, they don't. When you solve one problem, you typically introduce more hard problems. Like the classic thing I believed as a new founder is like, oh, after I raise money, I can just hire people and it'll be great. No, you gotta find the right people, you gotta manage them, and then you have while you have people dealing with a lot of the problems you currently deal with, the harder problems are going to bubble up to you. So then a greater share of your time will be dealt with, will be dealing with these harder problems. But generally it's, you gotta make sure that you don't spend a lot of your time feeling busy, but like focus always on like long-term, invest your time on things that are going to be really impactful. Don't, if there's something that you have a lot of emotional draw towards doing, it's always good to ask yourself if that's because it actually is the best thing for you to do. But I kind of sneaked in 2 instead of the 1, but that'll be my parting advice for today.
What a gift from Greg, an extra piece of advice and an hour of your time. Thank you so much for being on this podcast. It is always super interesting to open up the mind and life history of Greg. And yeah, we really appreciate it. I think this will be, I'm betting on it, this will be our most listened to episode. No brainer.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I look forward to listening to it myself.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Venture Capital. I hope you laughed, took notes, shed a tear, and most importantly, feel ready to go off on your own adventure. And remember, whenever you are ready, Wefunder is here to help.